good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ad America. My name is Ganara, one of the e-guys here in Ad America, and I hope that everyone is having a wonderful evening. For those of you new here, Ad America is the U.S. Embassy's American Center, and our mission is to provide a space for young Indonesians to learn more about the United States. Our event for this evening is called Ask Me Anything About Graduate Schools in the United States. But before we start, we have a trivia question for you. And the trivia question is it true or false? Graduate education is characterized by in depth training and specialized instruction. You can submit your answer on our social media platforms, and for those of you who are able to answer it correctly, will receive a live shout out from us. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce you guys to at America's very own Education USA advisor, Kak Santika Salim. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Ara. Thank you, everybody who is joining us today, online or in person. I'm counting on the people here. Wow. Thank you so much for making time in the middle of the weekdays and in the evening. Okay. So, without further ado, I will give you a brief Education USA introduction. So if you're new and you're wondering what Education USA is about, this is for you. But if you're not new, then welcome back to our event, and we will have a very good event coming up in a few weeks too. So please stay tuned to our next events as well. So Education USA is the U.S. Department of State network over 400 international student advising center in more than 170 countries. So we are all over the world, and we are officially from the U.S. Department of State, and Education USA at America is one of the advising center, right? And our network promotes U.S. higher education to students around the world by offering you accurate, comprehensive, and current information about the opportunity to study at the accredited post-secondary institutions in the state. Okay, so we have 6 centers in Indonesia. If you don't know yet, you can introduce your friends to these centers and get them started to their plan to study in the States. Everything is free of charge. All of the events, all of the um, resource and our services is free of charge and open to the public. Okay. And I'm going to read them real quick here for you. So we have 2 centers in Jakarta, one in the US Embassy with Mas Iqbal. And then the second one is here in At America, Jakarta with me, Santika, and my colleague, Christina. Christina will be in the Zoom chat box. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to her. And we also have a center in Surabaya in Universitas Erlangga Unair with Mbak Amber. And then in Malang, we are in Universitas Muhammadiyah with Mas Zaki. In Makassar, we are in Universitas Fajar with Kak Cendani. Last but not least, we are also located in Banda Aceh in Universitas Islam UIN Araniri with Kak Lilis. Okay? So no more excuses like I don't know where to go, I don't know what to do if I want to study to the States. All of these resources are free for you, and I'm going to tell you what we can do for you. Okay. All right. So these are the 5 steps, and I want you to stare at them a bit. I'm going to go through real quick here from 1 until 5, but I just want to let you know that you don't have to come to Education USA from the step 1. You can come to us on the 3rd step, even on the 4th step. Most of our advices actually came in on the 3rd step because that's the most important part, right? So the first step being research your options, which we will also talk about today. It's getting to know what kind of programs that you want to apply to, the schools that you want to apply to. It's really important because then it shapes your strategy. It also gives you direction on what to do next, right? Step 2 is finance your studies. So this is when we talk about if you need a scholarship, and if you need one, what are the scholarship that you will need, right? So is it partial? Is it full? Is it LPDP? Is it Fulbright? We can talk about it if you want to come in and to discuss that with us. Okay. The third step, complete your application. This is very, very important. This is for the US university. So they will require you to submit your CV, resume, essays, right? and letter of recommendations and transcript and so on and so forth. And any questions that you got for that part, you can come into us, and we also do essay review and CV and resume review for free and kind of unlimited. So it's really, really rare to spot any place, any other place that do that. I think we are the only one. Okay. So come to us, and this is the most crowded season, I would say, because the deadline is coming up, right? So if you don't see any slots for the appointment, please be patient and come back again. And I'll show you where you can book your appointment in just a minute. So step 4, apply for your student visa. This is when you got accepted to any US university, being it regardless of what type of university, what level of study, um, undergrad, graduate, doesn't matter. We will give you step by step on how you can proceed with applying your student visa. Of course, your U.S. university will also help you, giving you details and everything. But yes, if you have confusion, you can come to us, and you don't have to be too scared because there's misconception that you will get your visa, student visa to the states is really hard to get, which is not. We have a very good acceptance rate of 95% plus. So you just have to really follow the instructions and fill in all of the data really well and go for the interview, because nobody can replace you for that. Okay. All right. Lastly, prepare for your departure. This is the fifth step. Of course, beyond this fifth step, beyond these 5 steps, you can still come to us if you have any concern, even if you are already in the States. If we know the answer, we will give it to you. If not, we will refer you to someone else. Okay. Pre-departure orientation is the annual event for this fifth step. We just had it like a few months ago. It's meant to give a brief orientation and immersing you to the culture of the United States before you actually arrive. So we usually have a current student, alumni, and visa counsel to speak for the presentation and the Q&A, and it's an annual event with Education USA Indonesia as a whole. We also invite people from the embassy to give some congratulatory remarks and everything like that, and what to pack, what not to pack, what to expect, things like that. You can expect those things when you arrive in the States. And we always open all of our events for the public, so it doesn't have to be like you have to be accepted to join our pre-departure orientation. Some people join just to see, oh, what kind of things I should prepare before I decide to apply to the States, right? So technically, you are welcome to all of our events. Okay. And if you're watching us from YouTube, Twitter, Instagram Live, Facebook, and if you have questions, use the comment box to send the questions, and I will be receiving them and use it to the Q&A section later. Okay. Okay, this is the advising sessions booking page. You can go to calendly.com/educationusa at America or the Education USA at America Center, meaning you will be meeting me or Christina. But if you are keen to meet other advisor in other centers in Indonesia, you just need to swap this part, the AT America at the back, to Indonesia, and you will be able to choose 5 other centers. Okay, and read the instructions. And in-person advising is back, but with the limited slots, because we still have to maintain the Zoom sessions, because I think it's more convenient, right? And this is the QR code that leads you to that Calendly for us. You can just take a picture here, or you can email us if you have any question to jakarta.atamerica@educationusa.org. And like I said, because we are in the very peak season, if you go here today and you don't see any slot, you don't want to be surprised, because it will only open for the next 2 weeks. So you need to come back tomorrow, and then a new day or the date will open up and the slots will open up. Okay. So don't freak out. Just come back later. All right, our upcoming events are always published in these two websites. So if you're wondering, okay, what are other events that you can attend in the future, then you can come into atamerica.or.id/educationusa, or our official website here, educationusa.state.gov. And in this educationusa.state.gov, you can find much more information on other centers and other centers' upcoming events as well. So if you want to do that, you want to learn about Education USA, that is the right place. Okay. All right. So our upcoming events is this one. I wanted to promote it to you so that you have opportunity to join them. Join me and Christina because we will be there, not here, on the 22nd. So it will be the graduate fair. And free entrance, of course. It will be in the Park Hyatt Hotel. You can just Google it up, it will pop up in your phone. And it will be this Saturday, 22nd October from 1 until 4:30 p.m. You can scan this one right here. It will lead you to the Eventbrite where you can register for free and you will need to check in when you arrive. All right? Everybody got this, right? Screenshot it and take a picture of this. And before that, all right, I'm done with my presentation, and I'm going to call up our very special um, speaker for today. For AMA, Ask Me Anything About Graduate Schools in the United States. So we will talk about how to find the program, how to create your timeline, and what are the things that's desirable for the graduate school to see in your application. And we have a networking session of after the Q&A, we will close it up and we will have a networking with our special guest. So if you are here in person, please stay until the end for the networking because that's the prize today. Okay? Without further ado, I will call up our special guest, Dr. Michael Lozara, Associate Vice Provost of Academic Programs and Partnerships for the Global Affairs in University of California, Davis. Please give him a round of applause.
Thank you so much, Santika. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you tonight, and greetings to everybody who's online watching. It's really an honor for me to be part of this event, and I want to say a special thanks to Ad America for inviting me. This is my first time in Indonesia. I've been here for a week, and it's been a very excellent trip. We've had warm receptions, met so many amazing people along the way, and had a great time really building partnerships with the educational sector and our university partners here. And we had some great meetings with the U.S. Embassy, and part of it was this wonderful invitation to be with you here tonight. So I am a professor at UC Davis. I'm also an administrator. UC Davis is one of the University of California campuses. We're the northernmost one in the north of California. And I have been a professor there for 18 years. This is my 19th academic year that just started. And I teach in our Department of Spanish and Portuguese. So I am a linguist and a languages and literatures professor. So I'm in humanities discipline, although a lot of my academic work also touches the social sciences. So I have a lot of experience in those kinds of fields, but in my administrative work that I've been doing over the past few years, I've also worked across the university. We have lots of different colleges and schools and STEM disciplines and professional schools. And I've advised graduate students myself for many years, and actually ran the graduate committee or graduate admissions committee in my own department. So some of what I can share with you tonight comes from my personal experience of working over almost 2 decades with graduate students in the US. So I'd like to share with you my outline for tonight. So we're just going to go over some of the basics, talk about types of graduate degrees that you might pursue in the United States. We're going to talk about the different types of institutions that exist in the US because institutions vary widely in terms of their size and shape and characteristics, so to speak. We're going to give you some tips for finding a program that fits for you because I think that's one of the most important things is wherever you choose to go to graduate school, you have to make sure that it's really the right fit, that it's a place where you're going to feel comfortable and where you're going to thrive not only academically, but personally as well. Because graduate education is a large investment of time and it's an important chapter and period in your life. Then we're going to talk about how to prepare your application and some of the ways in which you might consider paying for graduate school or ideally finding a scholarship that will help to pay for it for you. And then once you're through that whole process and you get to graduate school, we're going to close out by talking a little bit about what life is like on a US university campus. So let's start with the types of graduate degrees. And I put a little phrase up here, which I think is something that's really important for you to remember, which is you should start by assessing what your goals are. In my particular case, I knew that I wanted to become a professor. And so I was going to pursue an academic track. And for me, a PhD degree, a doctoral degree, made the most sense. If your goal is more to work in, immediately go into the workforce, to gain a certain level of expertise, but may not necessarily be focused on research, maybe a master's degree is a better choice for you. So you really have to start by thinking about what it is that you want out of your graduate education and how that's going to serve you best in your future. So I've started to allude to the different types of graduate programs that exist in the US. This certainly is not an exhaustive list at all, but I thought I'd start out by pointing out the difference between two different kinds of master's degrees. So not all master's degrees are alike. Some master's degrees have a heavier research component to them, and others are focused mainly on the coursework and the gaining of certain knowledge base and certain expertise. So when you're focused mainly on acquiring skills to practice your chosen profession and largely doing just coursework, that is what we call a professional master's degree. When you're doing a thesis or taking comprehensive exams in your field that are perhaps a stepping stone toward further education or further experience in research, this is what's referred to as a research master's degree. Some universities have different tracks that you can apply to, whether it's research or professional. But in some instances, you just apply simply to a master's degree program at the university or in a particular department. And then once you're part of the program, you can make a decision as to whether you want to take a research track or not. So that's just something to keep in mind. The PhD degree, the Doctor of Philosophy degree, of course, is the highest degree offered by a university in the United States. It's research intensive and normally requires that students complete a dissertation or a thesis. This is a substantial piece of independent thought or original academic work, and normally the length, sometimes people would ask, how long is a doctoral thesis? It can range greatly depending on the discipline that you're in. So in scientific disciplines, they tend to be shorter. Maybe you write a thesis that's 30, 50 pages in length that could then be turned into one or more academic publishable journal articles. Or if you're in a discipline like mine in the humanities, I would say on average a dissertation is about 250 pages of double-spaced writing or so. And normally the research for that unfolds over a period of several years, at least 2, but maybe up to 4 years of research and writing that go into that. So the question is, how long do these degrees take? Normally, a master's degree would take you about 2 years, and a PhD degree would take, on average, 5 to 7 years. Sometimes if you study in the European system, PhD degrees can be a little bit shorter because they may contain less of a coursework component. Normally, when you do a PhD in the US, you take courses for a couple of years, and then you move on to the thesis phase, which is, or the dissertation phase, which is the latter part of your degree. There are also professional degrees, of course, that would fall under the category of graduate programs. If you were to study a law degree, for example, a JD in the United States, that would typically take you 3 years. If you were to study to become a medical doctor and get the MD degree, that would take you 4 years, but after that, many would go on to have additional specialized training in their fields, like residencies, for example, or different rotations in hospitals. So what kinds of institutions exist where you can study in the United States? The institution that I'm part of, the University of California, is a large public university system. So public universities tend to be in service to the state. So all of the states, all 50 states in the United States have public universities. Many of these are very, very good universities, but they tend to be large universities, and public universities that serve their states tend to also focus on research. You may have heard people talk about R1 or R2, Research 1 or Research 2 institutions. And so these are typically the institutions that are going to be granting the doctoral degrees. At some smaller universities, you may also find master's programs, but doctoral programs are going to be a little rarer in those types of settings. In addition to the public universities, we also have private universities. The main difference between the two is not only the size. The private universities often tend to be smaller than the public universities. So there are sort of mid-size private universities that may have, 5 to 10,000 students, or there may be smaller private universities that may have as few as 2,000 students. And there's a difference in the way these universities are funded. So the public universities often receive some percentage of their funding from the state in which they're located. Those percentages can vary greatly based on the state and the funding model, but the private universities generally get their funding from tuition, from endowments, and from donations through philanthropy. So in many cases, you'll find that the private university tuitions are much higher than some of the public universities. This often doesn't vary a lot for international students, but if you're a domestic student within the US, for example, it will always be less expensive to go to your state university than to many of the private universities. Research universities that grant master's or PhD degrees can be public or private, and there are 131 of these within the United States. And then there are also some other categories. You may have heard people talk about liberal arts colleges, which offer sciences but are often focused on a broad-based, what we call liberal education, that would involve humanities and social sciences disciplines for the most part. Some of these have graduate programs as well, but probably these are not the types of institutions that you would be looking to do PhD work in. Professional schools would include things like law, medicine, business, or journalism. Or for people who are interested in the arts, you might consider a program like the MFA, which is the Master of Fine Arts, which is offered by many institutions in the US. So I talked a little bit about large public universities like my own. We're part of the University of California system. The system of the University of California consists of 10 campuses which span the length of the state of California. And this just gives you, the reason I included this slide is because I wanted to give you a sense of the size and scale of a big state university system in the US. So we have throughout the system almost 300,000 students. About 40,000 of those students are on our campus. So one campus has about 40,000, but 300,000 in the whole system. We employ over 250,000 people and contribute in a great deal to the economy and the innovation base of the state of California. This last statistic is kind of interesting. Annually, there are about 1,700 inventions that come out of the different University of California schools, which averages out to about 5 per day. So we're really interested in research universities, and this will be your focus too, I'm sure, if you go to graduate school in the US, in how our research translates into societal impact. So we really are doing research not just for the sake of doing research, but because we want to make a difference in the world, because we want to tackle the challenges that face us both in our local communities and in our global community. Graduate program setups can be different in terms of the way they're structured in universities in the United States. I bring this as an example. I think traditionally when we think of studying in a graduate program, we think of departmentally based programs. So when you think of a university, you've got the university as a whole. Within the university, you will have colleges or schools, and within those colleges and schools, you have departments or programs that really impart the curriculum. So a departmental-based graduate program is like the one that I studied in when I went to graduate school. I'm a professor of Spanish, and I studied in a department of Spanish and Portuguese at the institution where I did my PhD. At some institutions, like my own, we also have what are called graduate groups, or in some universities, these might be referred to as interdisciplinary programs, which accept PhD students, or maybe in some instances, master's students as well. And the main difference is that whereas in a department, all of the faculty belong to that department, in a graduate group or in an interdisciplinary setting, a program would borrow faculty from multiple departments, and so those faculty would be affiliated with those programs, but your degree would be granted by the program to which those faculty are affiliated. So for example, in my university, my home department is Spanish and Portuguese, but I also am affiliated faculty with another 2 or 3 departments around the university where I can sit on PhD committees and work with students in their degrees. So let's talk about finding a program that fits for you. So what are some of the things to consider? Of course, students always think first and foremost about the reputation of the university. You want to go to the university that's the best in your field or the #1 university in your field. But I was reminded earlier today by a colleague that when you think about the United States and the educational system, there are over 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, and many of these are of extremely high quality. And so it's important not just to look at the overall reputation of the institution, but it's important to look at where your discipline that you want to study is well represented and excels. For example, I'm in the field of Spanish literature, but not every university in the US offers Spanish literature, and maybe even some of the best universities in the US, quote unquote, are not the place where you would necessarily want to go to study that. So you really have to think about the specialties as well. Where are your specialties or even the subspecialties of your fields best represented? You'll want to consider the quality of the research facilities. So in other words, what kind of infrastructure does the university have? And you want to ask some questions as well about things like the job placement record of the department. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. And I'll talk a little bit later about who you can ask those questions to. But for example, there's usually a graduate program coordinator in all departments in US universities. So if you're applying to the chemistry department, say, you'd want to reach out to the graduate program coordinator and maybe sort of gently ask these questions or ask to talk to faculty who might know the answers for you. Look at the availability of financial aid, and then also consider life, right? You have to consider life because life is important. You want to be happy, you want to be thriving. Everybody has their own considerations. Maybe you have family, maybe you have kids, maybe you're going to be moving your whole family to someplace in the US. So you'll want to consider, what is the housing like? What are the communities like? What are the schools like? What's the cost of living? Is there affordable housing? And then the geographic location as well, because some of the quote unquote best universities in the United States might be in places where it's cold and snows all the time. And maybe you don't like the cold and the snow. Maybe you'd rather be in the sunshine. So definitely keep these things in mind when you're thinking about where to go. So another good question is, where do you look for information? So to go, the first place you would go is probably to the graduate school website. So all US institutions that offer graduate programs have an Office of Graduate Studies. The name may vary. It may be called Graduate Division or something else, but there's an Office of Graduate Studies. And that's where you would go to find general information about admissions requirements, about graduate life, about scholarships that may be available internally from the universities in the US. But you can't stop at the graduate school website. You have to do a deeper dive than that. So another place you can go is to the departmental website, because there you're going to find information about the curriculum. You'll be able to poke around on the departmental websites and see, for example, what types of courses and what types of seminars are being offered. And it's important to look not just at the general catalog for the university, which would list the whole universe of courses that might potentially be offered. I think it's important to look at that, but you also need to look kind of semester by semester or quarter by quarter and look at the last year or two, which you should be able to find on the departmental websites, and see what are the seminars that the faculty are actually offering. What are the electives that they're offering that are in line with their current research programs? Because faculty today may not be offering the same seminars that they offered 5 years ago, right? So you have to kind of keep up on what's the latest and the greatest in the departments. Faculty often have research web pages and other web pages that are outside of the departmental website. If you were to Google me, for example, at UC Davis, you would probably get links to 5 or 6 different places where you could find information about me. And if I haven't updated all 5 or 6 of those websites recently, the information will vary in terms of how up to date and current it is. So definitely poke around and gather as much information as you can. Talk to your undergraduate professors at your institutions where you're studying now. They're great resources for you, and they can tell you a lot based on their own experience. Maybe they've done graduate work in the US as well, right? And then lastly, current students and faculty. Whenever anybody inquires with me about our graduate programs, I always say, you should talk to my PhD advisees and ask them for, as we like to say, the really, really, right? What is it really like being a student in the department? Is it a good experience? What's the environment like? Are they getting the support they need from the faculty, and are they getting great opportunities? And I mentioned the department graduate program coordinator as being a great resource, but there are also in every department in US PhD granting institutions, there's what's referred to as a DGS, or a Director of Graduate Studies. So whereas the departmental coordinator is normally a staff member who works in the department, the DGS is a faculty member in the department who is designated as sort of the point person to answer questions about the graduate programs. So the DGS would be the first point of contact for students who reach out to the program, and oftentimes maybe the graduate program coordinator would refer you to the DGS to answer more specific academically oriented questions. So let's move on to preparing a strong application. I think the important thing is that there's really no such thing as a generic application to graduate school. You have to tailor make the application to the program that you're applying to, and you really need to visit the departmental websites to see what the specifics are that are required. And if you have questions about that while you're going through the process, the graduate program coordinator is probably the best person to ask. Oftentimes, so I've been the DGS in my department, the Director of Graduate Studies, and sometimes I didn't even know the answers to the questions, and I would say, you have to ask the graduate program coordinator because she knows sort of the legalese or the rules and regulations about applying to the program. I'll tell you why it's important to look at these things, because in my program, for example, which is a languages program, in addition to the regular requirements of the university, we also ask students to submit a recording of themselves speaking in the target language and talking about their research. This is something that is unique to our program and that wouldn't be required by programs from around the university. And so you really have to look at that list of the specifics. Another thing that's important to keep in mind, and this doesn't apply, I think, in most cases. I think a lot of times when students apply to graduate school, they're applying to one discipline, and that's the discipline they want to study. But I've come across cases, for example, where students have applied to study Latin American literature in my department, but they also have applied to our comparative literature graduate program or our cultural studies PhD program. So all of these are kind of humanities and social sciences adjacent fields where their research might fit into any one of these departments, and they want to apply to multiple programs in order to give themselves the best chance of success. But the thing is, you can't just create one application and submit it to all 3 programs. You have to look at the specificities of each program and also talk about why that program is the right fit and why the faculty in that program would make the most sense to work with you. And then take a look at the deadlines too, because for example, at my university, I would say most deadlines for programs are around November or December. So coming up around this time of year, it's fall. in the United States. And I would say typically this is the time when you would put your applications in, because normally committees would deliberate in December, January, normally after the holiday break. So it would be in January or February. And then students tend to find out about their admission around March or so, with enrollment deadlines coming by about April. So that's the general timeline. But I mention all this also to say that there are programs that I know of at my university that will have rolling admissions where students can apply to the graduate programs all the way through June or so. So you really need to be attentive to the variance in the dates and deadlines associated with the different programs. So when you talk about an application to graduate school, there are different components that go into it. I have this kind of divided up into what are called technical elements, the non-subjective elements, and then the subjective elements. So what's the difference here? So as far as the technical elements go, these are the basics. You do the online application. This is where you fill out, who you are and where you went to school and just some basic information about you. And then you pay the application fee to the university. So that application fee will be different depending on the university you're applying to. Then there are certain non-subjective elements, which normally include your transcripts from your undergraduate study. Sometimes, depending on the university, standardized exams like the GRE or the GMAT, those types of exams are required. But I would say to keep a very close eye on that, because, for example, in my university, I would say the university as a whole is steering away from standardized testing. For undergraduate students, for example, we are no longer looking at standardized test scores as part of the application process, which is a really kind of revolutionary and new thing. But you're finding this happening more and more in universities. At the graduate level, there still are some in my university that require standardized tests, but that really depends on how great of a predictor the standardized test would be in that particular discipline. My department, for example, does not require GRE scores from students. So really take a look at that. And then, of course, there are the subjective elements like your essays, your resume or CV, the letters of recommendation that you would receive from your professors here. And let me just pause there for a second to say something specific about letters of recommendation. We accept into our graduate program a lot of international students. And there's a great difference oftentimes between what letters of recommendation look like that come from professors abroad versus recommendations that are written by people within the United States. And I'll tell you what the main difference is. Letters of recommendation in the United States tend to be quite personalized, and they tend to be fairly lengthy. It wouldn't be surprising to receive a letter of recommendation from a US colleague that was 2 full pages of text about the student that really gives some insight into who that student is, to what achievements that student has had, and to kind of the intellectual and personal promise that that student will bring to the institution. Oftentimes, I've received letters of recommendation from abroad that are quite positive. They say, this is a wonderful student. The student will do well in your program, and you should accept this student. But that's about all that the letter says. And so I think when colleagues in US universities read those kinds of letters, certainly from experience, they can put them into context. But to be honest, they're not all that helpful, right? So one of the things that you can do is advocate for yourselves with your professors here and find the professors who know you best to write those letters of recommendation and ask them to go the extra mile in writing them and to put some detail in there about the specifics of the work that you've done with them. That will be very important. And then the other subjective elements are the writing sample. So sometimes you'll have to send a writing sample, sometimes you won't, depending on the program. This might be a piece of academic writing or a course paper that you wrote that you're particularly proud of, something of that nature. And then some schools require interviews or portfolios of different kinds. A portfolio might be required, for example, if you're in an artistic field or if you're applying to a design program or something of that nature. So the US is really these days focused on what we call holistic admissions. So if you're thinking it's just about test scores or a score on an English language proficiency exam, you should think again. It's really about they're accepting you as a person, you as a student, you as a person who is going to contribute to their community and to the university community over a period of years. And so while the test scores and the numbers are still part of it or potentially part of it, you really should not dismiss the subjective elements of the application. Those are really the parts, from my own experience sitting on graduate admissions committees, that the colleagues really discuss and debate. And when there are students, for example, in my department that we're thinking about admitting, we go around and we present on the profiles of those different students based on what we've been able to interpret from the application. So I've already kind of talked in general about the timeline for applications. I'm just going to let this slide be here for a moment so that you can take a screenshot of it or something like that. There's a lot of information, way too much to go over here. But this just kind of walks you through the process from start to finish. So the key takeaway, I think, is to think ahead about the graduate program that you're applying to, because it is a lot of work. It's a lot of paperwork to get together. It's a lot of thinking. It's a lot of research. So definitely, be planning, more than a year in advance, I would say, to think about where you might apply and to be talking to people about it. So hopefully you've got a screenshot of this and you can take a look later at the timeline, or feel free to ask me questions during the Q&A. I wanted to talk a little bit specifically about the statement of purpose that you write. As I was saying, this is a statement about you. It presents you as a candidate. It gives insight into who you are as an individual, as a scholar, and as a candidate. And these statements, as I also mentioned earlier, should not be generic. They should be customized for the individual program you're applying to. These statements will not be dismissed. They will be read by everybody in the committee and by the different faculty in the program. And oftentimes, whenever somebody asks me, what should I have try to come across in a statement like this? It's not only what's unique about you, but I think you also really importantly want to show that you're an intellectually curious person, that you have questions that you want to answer, and that your graduate education is what's going to help you answer those questions. That there's something burning inside of you that's going to make you wake up every day and want to go to the lab or want to go to the library and want to engage with your colleagues and enrich the community. So you really want to show what those questions are that are keeping you up at night and why they're important both to you and to society, right? So definitely put that in there. You want to talk about what some of your goals are for the future and for your research. Where do you hope to go with your research? It's okay not to know everything from the beginning. So nobody expects you at the beginning of a graduate career to have worked out the precise niche topic that your dissertation will eventually cover. But they do want to see an interest in a field, in an area, and some general questions that might lead to some deeper and more specific questions later. You want to show your fit to the department as well. So if you've had a chance to reach out to a particular faculty member in the department, for example, mention that in your statement of purpose, that you've already had some conversation and that you feel like working with Professor X or Professor Y would be a great fit for particular reasons. But you need to be open as well, because life is dynamic, as we know, and faculty move around. And it could very well be that Professor X is retiring, and by the time you get to campus next year, he or she will not be there anymore, right? So you don't want to tailor your application so much that that you make it seem like that's the only professor that you could work with at the university. And definitely be concise and proofread carefully. You don't want to have a lot of English mistakes in there if you can avoid them. So depending on your own level of English, have a friend, have a teacher, have somebody look it over who can be a good proofreader for you. So that was the statement of purpose. Some universities just require that, and that's it. At my university, there's actually a second statement that we require of applicants, and this is called your personal statement. So your personal statement is less about your research, and it's more specifically about you, about the personal qualities, perspectives, and personal experiences that you'll bring to the program. So for example, maybe there's something in your background that makes you uniquely qualified, or that makes you think that you'll be able to contribute in particular ways to the diversity of the institution, both personal diversity and diversity of thought as well. Don't be afraid to talk about the challenges you faced along the way. So you want to highlight your background, but also potentially point out some of those challenges and how you've confronted them and how you've overcome them with time. But keep it future focused too. What are your goals and aspirations? And talk about how you or your research will contribute to the diversity of the campus. So diversity statements are becoming a common requirement in US universities. So my university calls it the personal statement, but this is really the place where you would talk about your diversity contributions. Nowadays too, even in US universities for faculty hiring, all faculty who are applying for a faculty job in my university and in many universities have to also submit a diversity statement talking about not only how they'll contribute to the diversity, but how they'll mentor students or work with the local community in ways that contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we move on to a very important question, which is how do you pay for it all, the funding, right? So there are different ways. There are fellowships that you can get. Some of these are extramural fellowships. That's a fancy way of saying external funding. So this would be the kind of funding, for example, that comes from, say, LPDP in Indonesia, where you're getting a scholarship that would take you and cover your graduate education. But there are other fellowships that are often smaller in nature. They're not going to pay for your whole education, but they would come from within the university in the US to which you're applying. And oftentimes institutions have very long lists of very niche fellowships that students could be eligible for. I'll give you an example. In my department, which focuses on Latin American studies, we bring many students from Latin America. There was a donor at some point in history of my institution who endowed a fund for Colombian graduate students in particular. So this is one that we know about as an admissions committee, and when we get applicants from Colombia, we put those applicants forward for this particular fellowship. Now, it's not discipline specific. People across the university compete for it. So somebody in chemistry, just like somebody in literature, might be eligible by virtue of the fact that they're from Colombia. But the student, when they were applying, may not have ever known about that. So one thing that you'd want to do with your graduate program, prospective graduate program, is to inquire if there are specific fellowships like that that you may not know about that they can share with you or nominate you for. Once you get there, students often support themselves through teaching and research assistantships as well. So in our department, most of our graduate students teach from the very beginning. They teach our undergraduate language courses, for example. Or if you're working in the sciences, you may be supported through a grant that your major professor has in their lab. And then, of course, another option would be loans or campus employment. There are opportunities on US campuses to do work study and to make a little bit of extra money that way that can help you cover your living expenses if those aren't covered by fellowships, for example. And then to close it out, a little bit about what life is like on as a grad student in a US university. I would say, first and foremost, you should be prepared to work hard. Grad students, graduate education is for very dedicated people. I often say that a PhD in particular, master's too, but a PhD in particular is really for individuals that have internal drive to do the research, to focus on something. You, of course, will be mentored by a major professor and by a committee throughout the time in your graduate education, and you'll be part of a community, and you'll always have people to turn to. But the person who's ultimately going to have to do the research and go to the library or sit in the computer or go to the lab every day is you, right? nobody will be able to do it for you. Nobody's going to be able to answer your research question for you. So um, uh, I, that's part of the important self-assessment I think that everyone should do before they take on the challenge of a graduate education. But there's also a lot of fun parts about being on a university campus. There's the camaraderie, there's the clubs. At my university, the building where I work for my administrative role is our international center, which is a beautiful space on the campus where international students go. In particular, they hang out. There's always people studying there. They drink coffee. And it's a beautiful place to be. But we also have, for example, a brand new graduate school building on the campus, which is designed specifically to be a welcoming place for graduate students from across the campus to gather. There's quiet study space there as well. So, there are plenty of places on US campuses to really support your learning and to support your engagement as a community. And then there's extracurriculars. If you're into sports, and maybe you're just kind of an amateur player of a particular sport, you can find intramural clubs and things like that to play. I know soccer is very popular at UC Davis among our domestic students, but particularly among the international students, because soccer is, I know quite popular all over the world, obviously. So you always see people out on the quad playing soccer, and it just lends a great air to the atmosphere as well. And then you can seek out other professional development opportunities, such as internships, for example. At my university, as at most universities, we have an internship and career center where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of internship opportunities that are available to students who are studying with us. And just always remember that everybody is there to support your success in graduate school. It's definitely a commitment, it's definitely a journey, but if you're passionate about it, it's a journey worth taking and will lead to great opportunities in the future. So I thank you all for your time and your attention, and I look forward to chatting a bit more.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you for the round of applause. And this is Michael's contact if you have further question and if you are specific targeting to apply to the UC Davis, you know where to find him. Okay. So we are opening the Q&A section, both online and in person, but I will prioritize the online audience first because we will close this early and have a networking in person so you can ask your questions directly to Michael if you're here in Ed America. So we have the first online question here, and the second one just popped in. So from Ifa here, our good advisee to what we should do if we were rejected for PhD program with the reason of no funding and not accepted for the self-funding, which is interesting. I think Ifa meant what we should do if we were rejected for the PhD program. And the reason is that the university or the faculty or the department currently have no funding.
Okay, so
Mhm.
this is why it's important to apply to multiple institutions. Don't put all your eggs in one basket,
Yes.
right? This is, take it from experience. When I
Mhm.
applied to graduate school, I applied to probably 15
Mhm.
different institutions because when you do that, it empowers you to have choice,
Yes.
right? And that's where you ultimately want to end up. I had sort of a mixed bag of results. Uh, there are going to be institutions where you're not accepted
Mhm.
because just that's life. Those are the odds, right?
Exactly.
And you
Yeah.
never know exactly why. So, also another important thing is not to take it personally,
Yes.
right? It's not necessarily a sign that you're not worthy of graduate school or that your research isn't worthy of
Yeah.
doing. It could just be that it's not the right fit, or maybe it's not the right funding, or maybe they had a threshold and you were candidate number 4, but they could only take 3,
Free.
right?
Exactly. Yes.
Exactly. So there are many, many factors, and you're never going to know exactly what. So, exactly, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Apply to a lot of programs. And if that is
Mhm.
the greatest of all programs,
Yeah.
and that's the only one where you see yourself and the only one where you want to be, and if it's not that one, it's the highway,
Mhm.
then ask some questions and try again next year.
Yes. So Michael just replied perfectly on what I always tell my advisees. So I know Michael did not mention a lot about Education USA, but a lot of the things that Michael explained in the PPT in his presentation is where you can come to Education USA for assistance. For example, if you don't know your timeline, you don't know your strategy, what Michael explained was something general for everybody without in regards of if you're applying for LPDP, if you're applying for Fulbright. That timeline could be different, and also the strategy could be different because if you're applying to LPDP, there's almost no point for you to apply to schools that's not listed in the school, right? Sorry, listed in the LPDP list of schools. And if you're applying to Fulbright, you don't really have to worry about, applying to certain school because at the end of the day, once you got the Fulbright scholarship, they will be the one who kind of recommend you to the school, right? So it's a different system. It's not tailored for, one fits it all. So I want everybody to always apply to multiple schools at least. And if you have difficulties in paying for the application fee, there are a lot of schools, and Michael can help me here, that gives application fee waiver. That means you don't have to pay for the application fee, and that could add to your higher probability and opportunity to get accepted to at least one school if you apply to more, right?
Right. So definitely inquire about that waiver with the graduate school because they're the ones who can authorize that for you.
Yep, and I have met a few new advisees that only have one school to apply to, and I asked that question like, why? Because if you apply to one versus like six schools, right, Michael, for example, you have much more chance to get accepted at least in one university if you apply to six schools instead of one school.
And I just go back to what I said earlier. Life is unpredictable because
Yeah.
there are the reach schools and there are kind of the medium schools and the safe schools. And normally people make that list, but I think a lot of people are surprised. You may get into your reach school and not into one of the medium schools or even one of your safe schools. So just keep your options open, and the right path will open up for you.
Yeah. And sometimes we kind of misunderstood what the university have been putting out there, what they're doing and whatnot. And once you apply and they see your application in overall, because it's holistic, right? And then they see that, oh, this is not what we are doing. This is not what we have. So you're not, you are better off in other university who can give you what you're looking for. So if you are only applying to one, you are just omitting that other possibilities. And Michael here, being American and native speaker, he applied to 15 schools. Everybody. So what's your excuse? Like, if we are international students, we have to prove ourselves even more. Then probably you should be applying to more schools, right? Michael, 15 schools for your PhD application, or
Yes, 15 for my PhD
wow.
application. And then after I got my PhD and I applied to jobs, I think I applied to about 30.
Okay, double that. Okay.
Double
And
that.
yeah,
But again, it was the same reason. It's you want to have a universe of choice.
definitely. Definitely.
Put
So,
yourself in the driver's seat.
yes. So that is the first tips if anything about applying to the states, whether that's undergrad, grad, S2 or S3, you want to seek out to more options. And I can tell you that my PhD advisees who got into their PhD program right now, two of them that I can really remember, they applied for because like what we discussed, right? It's they're sure that that school have what it is that they're looking for. So I had the PhD candidate who applied for three times before he got accepted to the university, not the same university, but he applied like 3 years in a row to different universities and then got accepted on the third year to the school that can fund his studies and research. And one of them actually reached out to multiple schools in the same year and negotiated with the professors like, hi professor, I needed some like summer job or something to cover the remaining that's not covered in the scholarship. Do you have any idea what are the summer jobs availability? And if you don't reach out, you will not get that information. So that's how you kind of like do it in this scenario, right? And let's move to the second question. I hope that answers your question, Ifa, and help anybody here who have the same question. And this one is from Chitra. I'm not that quite clear about the question. Chitra said, "Thank you for your explanation, Dr. Michael. I was wondering if an associate professor could supervise a doctoral students, PhD students, dissertation."
Yes, the answer
Okay.
to that is absolutely. The question makes perfect sense to me because
Mhm.
it makes me think about when I first started as a professor, getting close to 20 years ago. So, for those unfamiliar with the US system, and this is becoming more and more global, this nomenclature, but when a faculty member first starts in a university, they're normally referred to as an assistant professor if they're on what is called the tenure track, which is leading toward a permanent position in the university. That period as an assistant professor typically lasts about 6 years, at which point the professor is then goes up for promotion. And the promotion is to become associate professor, which normally carries tenure, although there are some universities that make a distinction between associate professor with tenure and associate professor without tenure. And then beyond that, a number of years down the road from there, people would become a full professor, for example. So all of this is to say that when I started on day one, it was an interesting phenomenon because I had been a graduate student basically yesterday. And suddenly I had a PhD student knocking on my door saying, "Will you direct my dissertation?" And, of course, I said with great trepidation, "Sure, I'll do that," thinking, what am I going to tell this person,
Yeah,
right?
this is my first.
But everybody has to start somewhere. And that was as an assistant professor that I was doing that. As an associate professor, certainly a
Right.
person has been around for some amount of time, at least 6, 7, 8, 9 years, maybe a decade, and has quite a bit of experience, and so they would be fully qualified to direct those dissertations. But even an assistant professor can.
Right. But Chitra, again, I will go for this question to the department or the faculty that you are applying to. And if you don't know how to do it, you can reach out to me or Christina. We will be more than happy to assist you in maybe going to the official university website, take a look at what they wrote there and everything, and how you could ask for the specific details, because this is based on Michael's experience, and from what I know is that as long as they are in the department and that they are listed there as one of the possible supervisor, then yes, regardless of their title, of course. But you have to double check with your faculty or the program that you're applying
Now, I would add one additional thing. So, if you look at a department's website and you see
to.
the
Right.
list of the faculty, there will normally in departments be adjunct faculty, and there will also be what we in the U.S. nomenclature refer to as lecturers. So, a lecturer, if you think about the European terminology, would be like a tenure track faculty member, right, who would guide doctoral students and,
Right.
and master's students. In the US, a lecturer is not a tenure track faculty member. So if you see that listed and it says lecturer, that would not be a person who would likely be eligible to direct your research.
Right. Gotcha. So not lecturers, but the other one. So from Maisya Sabhira, thank you, Michael. I heard that there are certain internship provided from the faculty. How about externship? Because there are universities which provide externship, and how is it different than the internship? Do you know any of this?
Not my area of expertise, really,
All
on the
right,
externships,
and
but
that's fine.
right.
Yeah.
But you can go. Normally there are centers that deal with
Mhm.
internship and externship
Yeah.
opportunities on the campuses, and they would be your best resource once you're there.
Yes.
Either the faculty or the professionals on the campus who can guide you in the right direction.
Right. And this is very technical. And from my experience, I can tell you that there are certain programs that are really unique to the point that they have the summer internship program that they can uh, send you to other countries like Japan, Korea, South Korea. Thailand, you name it. So they have this company that they partner with that they will send students to the company for internship, and that's count as external, right? But for internship, I think you are referring to OPT. If you know what OPT is, it's optional practical training. It is eligible for all international students, not only from Indonesia. Once you are about to graduate, you can apply for that OPT permit. And if you got the OPT permit, then you can apply for full-time job in the States. And then you work full-time as a professional, not even as an intern, if you may, for about a year, right? And for STEM field, you can ask for an extension of 2 years, and that's subject to the approval. And if you're LPDP awardees, I'm so sorry. I don't think you will qualify because the visa status is different. So that OPT is applicable for the F1 student visa, not the J1. Because for LPDP, you will get J1. For Fulbrighter, you will also get J1. Okay, I hope that helps. Maisha, if you want to discuss further, you can come and find us. And again, yes, internship. Um, yeah, if you're talking about work on the campus, then all international students are eligible for that, up to 20 hours per week on campus only. Okay, hope that helps. And from Nicholas, following up on the rejected application, in general, if our application are rejected and we would like to reapply for the same program in the same university the following year, of course, what do we need to prepare better, and how do we know which part to revise since the selection process is holistic? Thank you so much. So, Nicholas, quoting from the same PhD advisee that I had that we applied 3 times, he actually went and asked for the input,
That's good.
right?
Yeah, that's really good.
So, do you have any other tips, maybe?
So definitely ask for the input. How much input you'll get is hard to predict.
Yes.
You may get some good feedback, or you may get radio silence.
Yes.
But definitely ask for it. That's important. I think a lot of times one of the best things to do is to look back at the substantive parts, some of those subjective parts of the application, because sometimes, for example, I know one of the differentiators in my program, for example, is the writing sample that students send. Maybe they sent a course paper that just wasn't quite up to the level that we would have expected. Which is not to say that you couldn't take that course paper and go back and revise it, work on it more, make the bibliography more robust, sharpen your research questions a little bit, and then resubmit it. But what I wouldn't do is resubmit everything just in the same way that you submitted it the first time. I think when we've seen students fail more than once in the application pool, it's precisely because of that, because they just dusted it off and they maybe changed one or two little things, and that was
Yeah.
it. And a lot of times the committees, it'll be the same people sitting on a committee from year to year, and they'll remember this particular applicant. And so you want to make sure that the changes are substantive and substantial.
Right. Or like, when they're reading it again, it's deja vu. It's like, I think I've read this somewhere before, which was last year. It's the same
Exactly.
exact paper. And you don't want to do that at all because um, imagine what you can improve in a year. And if you're submitting the exact same CV or resume or the exact same essay or research proposal, it just shows that you probably do not put that much effort to actually improve your application and to show them that you're the right person um, to get into that program. And the input for that particular PhD applicants, because he is doing research and applying for the international relation specific field. So the input was to have some international exposure. Not surprised, right? Because then it's related to the field that he's trying to research on. And if you have the international exposure or working with other researcher in other countries than Indonesia, it shows your capability of, presenting that field.
So I mean, this brings up another good point. Kind of getting certain dimensions of your profile that may not really be honed or cultivated, and kind of working on those before you apply to graduate school. This is particularly important in certain areas. Like, for example, if your goal is to study in an MBA program, a business program in the US, you'll want to, often those programs are going to value several years of work experience, because when you get in there with your colleagues, you're going to be doing kind of real life case based problem solving studies. And if you've had real life experience, your contributions there are going to be much richer, as well as what you're learning from your colleagues who've had similar experience.
Exactly. So they're trying to avoid, what they're trying to avoid is like admitting someone who will be just that silence in the class. Like, in the class discussion, they're talking about this and then that student just sit there, don't know what to say. That's what they're trying to avoid. So if, like what Michael presented, what you can bring into the cohort, your values, your experience, that's what you can write in your essay. Um, Not all of them, but most of the things that you think are really valuable that not everyone will have. Okay. And we received another question. I'm going to skip the first one from Muhammad. Sorry, Muhammad, because I don't really understand it. So I'm going to go for the second and the third question from you. Could you provide any tips to find which university that excels in my targeted program? So, for example, if we talk about this before we actually start the event, right? We talk about, for example, for UC Davis, it's agriculture and what's the other one?
Veterinary
Yes,
medicine,
there you go.
or many different things.
Right. And how do you know that? Like, let's say if I want to take veterinary, or food tech or something like that, how do I know that UC Davis excels in that? How
Well,
do I do
you
that?
can look at published rankings, because they're, in addition to the overall rankings of universities, you can look at field-specific rankings as well. So that's one way to do it. But also, I mean, if there are institutions that you're drawn toward, you can go to their main webpage, and I can guarantee you that on the UC Davis webpage, it wouldn't be too hard. You wouldn't have to go in too many pages to find some of those real specialty areas in which the university shines.
Exactly.
Universities are going to wear that on their sleeve and be very proud of it.
Exactly. So it will be very apparent on their official website. But in the first step, if you're really how would I say this? If you really have no idea what U.S. universities uh, names are, specialties are, you need to go into Google and then just type what you want to study, and then it will pop you to the top results of third-party websites. And please, please, please go to those websites only to look at the university name and go to the official university name that usually ends with .edu and double check if that's the truth. Like that university have this program. Like you have to double check that to the official university website, and
Right.
then you can decide. Right there, you go. And speaking of, um, which program is the best in which university, I would like to remind you that everybody is looking for different things. Some of my advice, you look for, this very unique program that allows them to take courses. So if they're like applying to master in public policy, and that specific school allows them to take courses from the MBA program, the business school, as if they're also studying MBA, and that's what he or she is looking for. It's not necessarily that school is the best for the MPP or the Master of Public Policy, but he's looking for that. She's looking for that specific flexibility. So that's the best one for you. So it's usually not the best one that's stated on the ranking for everybody, but you have to find what appeals to you, what you are looking for, and that starts with your career goal.
Right. And
Okay.
really, just as a reminder again, look at those subspecialties, because, PhD research is usually very specific. And if you have particular research questions, maybe you are looking at, gender or indigenous studies, or, whatever it is you may be looking for. A department may be specialized in your general area, but there may not be faculty working on the particular theoretical components that would be of interest to you. So maybe you would choose University X over University Y for that reason.
Yep, that's totally right. And a last question from our online audience before we move to the networking. If my undergraduate professors were unable to provide a letter of recommendation, is there any option to obtain the letter, probably other than the previous past professors? What do you think?
I would say yes. I mean, if you're going into an academic setting, obviously the optimal thing is to have academic references. So I would really do your best to get those. If you are required to turn in, say, 3 letters of recommendation, it may be okay to have one of those letters of recommendation not be an academic reference, but it should be somebody who knows you well and who can really speak to your character in an important way. So you'd want that letter to be extra substantive if it were not academic.
Right. So usually when they write minimum of 2 letters of recommendation, if there is no specifications or details on where you should be getting the letters from, we can assume that one of them should be from academic and the other one should be from your professional experience. But if they ask for a minimum of 3, then you can try to get creative if you belong to a certain organization or community and that you do volunteers there, and that you have a supervisor who can attest to your skills and passion and whatnot, then that can be the third letter of recommendation.
Absolutely. And I would say that, something to be thinking about now as you're finishing up your undergraduate education and thinking toward graduate school is if you're the person who, for whatever reasons, has kind of faded into the woodwork and sat in the back of the room and not really been vocal in the classroom or gotten to know your professors, take advantage of the time that you have left as an undergraduate to really forge those relationships because I can tell you that I've been asked many times to write letters of recommendations for students that I really couldn't say much personally about. And those letters differ greatly. Even if they're positive in nature, they differ greatly from the ones where I really know the students well.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. And for letter of recommendations, I actually do another set of info session that I glued together with the CV or resume. And I gave you a bunch of tips there. And if you missed it, you can watch it on the YouTube from at America's YouTube. But I'm going to tell you that you can please help your recommenders to help you. So like if you graduated like 5 years ago and of course your past professor wouldn't like really remember who you are if you're not in touch, right? And even if you are in touch, sometimes they forgot your accomplishment when you took that course and that project that you were doing really well. So your job is to remind them, to provide them with your CV or resume, to provide them your research proposal maybe and your essay. Tell them what your goals are and everything, or the bullet points of the things that you want them to highlight for you. Okay, that's all for me. From me and from the Q&A section for the online audience, and we are going to close this event by giving it back to the Ad America team. And if you're here, please stay here, and we will continue with the networking. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you guys gain a lot of knowledge and insights from today's session. I would also like to thank Dr. Michael and Kak Santika for sharing to us your knowledge. And in the beginning of this event, if you guys remember, we asked you guys a trivia question. And that question was, is it true or false? Graduate education is characterized by in depth training and specialized instruction. And the correct answer to that is true. Study and learning are more self directed at the graduate level than the undergraduate level. Shout out goes out to at Nikki Kaga from Instagram for answering the question correctly. And thank you so much to everyone else who has also participated. Now, for those of you who are interested in attending more of At America's programs and events, you can visit our website at www.atamerica.or.id. And we are also on social media. We've got Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and also YouTube at AT America. And by following us on our social medias, you can gain a lot of our event updates, fun content, and so much more. All right, everyone. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and see you soon at the next Ad America event.